The Innkeeper by Life Sketcher. Chapter 1531 and Shortcomings. "You're so going to regret this," Lex said through gritted teeth one last time, right as he finally completed his cultivation, regaining full control over his body once. The hate he felt for that accursed Nas was overflowing greater than ever before, though for now he had to restrain it so that he could focus on his more urgent tasks. The reason for Lex's hate, unexpectedly, was not because he trapped Lex in a strange game of universal Go with rules he didn't understand and consequences that were very real. That, of course, caused some irritation. The fact that the game could also very well put his life in danger also contributed a bit. At the moment, however, the reason Lex really hated him was because he had missed the death match between William and that fiery mammoth. Lex had wanted to watch his ancestor fight to try and understand more about him. Sure, Lex could watch the recording of the fight, and intended to do just that, but with the outcome of the match already known, there was no suspense. It was like that damn accursed Nas had spoiled the TV show Lex had been so long waiting to watch. Or a more accurate comparison would be that Lex had been looking forward to a highly anticipated boxing match, for example, a match between a world champion and some random YouTuber trying to look cool only for that stupid Nas to come along and rig the match so that the YouTuber won the fight somehow. However, that comparison wasn't completely accurate, since his ancestor still won the fight, just as Lex had expected. The point was, the frustration in both those scenarios was the same. At least he intended on watching the Emperor's match in person to make up for it. The problem he was now facing was that he was, once again, too strong. Fortunately, the furniture in his office wouldn't break so easily. Lex picked himself off the floor and sat back in his chair. The list of things he had to do almost immediately was pretty large, which is why Lex ignored the box containing the fruit from the primordial garden, and instead pulled up his system panel. The first order of business was completing his quest. So far, he had a reputation for overachieving in most of his quests, though since this one had a fixed reward he didn't think there was such a thing as an overachievement. New quest: visit the Seraphim Resort, identify 3 shortcomings of the Midnight Inn, and then improve them. Quest time limit: 1 year. Quest reward: the Bagandi violin. Quest failure punishment: 3 metric tons. Remarks: it's not copying if you do it better than the original, it's innovation. Looking at the quest requirements, Lex thought back to his time and the resort and began to compare. To start with, one of the things that was most prominent about the resort, at least to Lex, was the number of unique services they provided. Now the inn also provided a lot of services, such as meditation and training rooms, not to mention the amazing healing services and the guild room. But all of these were, to a degree, common services that all major powers provided. None of them were unique exclusively to the inn. Even though the resort may not necessarily have entirely unique services, since the existence of other heavens meant other places could replicate those exact services, they were rare enough that they could be considered a resort exclusive. The next thing that stood out to him was the existence of dedicated packages for guests. The Midnight Inn had a lot of services and amenities, but they were all individual, and it was up to the guest to pick and choose what they liked. But if various packages could be created, each one for a different price point or serving a different need, then that would certainly provide the inn's guests with a better experience. The last thing that the inn was lacking in comparison to the resort, was external prestige. Now Lex personally didn't think that the inn needed something like this, but he also understood how such things could add to the influence of the inn. For example, as soon as Lex came to the resort, besides telling him a little bit about the history of the resort, name-dropping multiple Dao lords along the way, Lycanderoth also mentioned how the Phoenixes had recently visited the resort, and how they had a long history of cooperation. By linking the resort to the Phoenixes, Lycanderoth had basically linked the prestige of that race with the resort. Now one could argue about who was benefiting from whom, but the fact that such an argument could even be held in the first place was kind of the point of doing it. With these things in mind, Lex began to plan out how to make up for the shortcomings of the inn. This wasn't the kind of quest that could be completed by just buying a new service from the system, or plopping in a new primordial lotus into the inn. Lex needed to actually plan, and personally make up for the shortcomings of the inn. Fortunately, he had a plan. "Mary, please summon Ash, the galactic sovereign turtle, and the gardener to my office," he said as he considered what exactly to do. Now that he himself was an immortal, alongside a number of other workers, the easiest segment to cater to consisted of his mortal guests. Just as the resort, which catered to Tao lords, had multiple services which could benefit immortals, he was going to use the powers of his immortal workers, and combine it with the inn's ability to cater to immortals, and create revolutionary services for mortals, services that did not rely on the system, but on the individual workers themselves. He would create packages, design entire stays at the inn, and establish new services, all to address the many needs of his mortal guests. He genuinely wanted to make the Midnight Inn the best inn in the universe, but for now, it would just be the best inn for mortals. With that as a foundation, one day he could take things a step further. For now, though, he had to bring his vision to life. Life Sketch. Chapter 1532 Growth Plans. It did not take long before the three entered his office, though the arrival of the sovereign turtle in his office resulted in a new phenomenon that Lex hadn't experienced before. Usually, when someone large entered his office, or any building within the Midnight Inn, their size would automatically be reduced to easily fit within the building. One prominent example was Erebos the Insatiable, who was a very large planet. However, when it entered the innkeeper's office, it was reduced to the size of a disco ball. Yet when the galactic sovereign turtle entered his office, instead of reducing in size, it caused the innkeeper's office to grow bigger to accommodate it instead. Nobody other than Lex seemed to notice the change, nor did they find it odd in any way. Truthfully, Lex too should have expected nothing less from a sovereign. "I have called the three of you here today to discuss the new direction that the Midnight Inn will be focusing its growth towards for the next 1,000 years or so," said the innkeeper with a warm smile, causing the three of them to relax. "Gardener and Turtle, you two are here because even before you form a heaven, I plan on integrating your efforts into the new growth plan. From now on, while we will continue to host all guests, our attention will specifically be focused on improving our service towards mortals. Allow me to expound on this topic a little, and then you all can contribute your ideas. To become the best inn in the universe, we need to offer more than room and boarding. Our services, while numerous, are too generic and not specialized enough. As such, we will begin by focusing on a certain segment of guests first and improving their experience until we can improve no further, and then see what we have learned before implementing it on the rest. Gardener, Turtle, even though you have not yet formed a heaven, the foundation you are setting, in itself, is already more than sufficient to be considered a holy land by mortal standards. As such, I want to develop a number of services and facilities centered around mortals in your fledgling heaven. Recently, a worker ventured to a heaven to stay at the Seraphim Resort, and upon his return had many positive things to say. They decontaminated his body of harmful auras, addressed his mental and spiritual needs, strengthened the foundation of his body, increased his strength in various ways, all while providing him with a pleasant and enjoyable experience. The Midnight Inn has more than enough facilities and resources to be able to provide all these facilities and more for mortals. I want to create services that help mortals find meaning and enlightenment, regardless of the troubles they are facing. I want to create services geared towards training, towards healing, towards socializing, towards education, and everything else we can possibly provide. But there's more. Not only do I want to start providing such services, I want the Midnight Inn to become the go-to place for numerous official organizations and powers to host their training or other events. The more the Midnight Inn is used by properly recognized, official powers specifically at the mortal level for now, the better. For this, I want you to reach out to two of the existing most prominent groups who already use the Midnight Inn for various purposes in their organization, and conduct a review of what their experience is like, and how it can be improved. The Paladins and the Diplo have been using the inn in an official capacity for a very long time, and so are the perfect candidates to question about this. Even as Lex talked about the two groups, he thought about the Diplo. They were a small, fly-like insectoid race that had a horrible reputation. In fact, Lex didn't want them as guests at the inn, yet they never broke any rules here, so Lex had no reason to justify expelling them. They were evil, he knew, but they were also decent guests. The Midnight Inn would be hosting all kinds of beings, and it would not always be obvious at a glance who was evil and who wasn't, which is why he needed to distance himself from the mentality of judging others based on their actions outside. It wasn't easy, and in fact it troubled Lex's morality a bit. If it was up to him, he would not offer any services to a race which had such a terrible reputation. But the mental argument always came back to the same thing: the Diplo were easy to judge because their actions were publicly known. Theoretically, he could oust them. But the truth of his guests would not always be so evident, and it would be hard to discover their character and history. As such, instead of a guest's past, he needed to learn to focus on their capacity as a guest more than anything else. Actually, that was exactly why he wanted the Paladins and Diplo interviewed. As an organization or power, they were both as far apart in terms of their reputation as possible. There are 3 things we are going to be focusing on when improving services for guests. The first is utilizing the unique resources of the Midnight Inn to create new services for mortal guests. The second is creating various packages so that mortal guests who come to the inn with a very specific purpose have an easier time getting what they want. Finally, the third is partnering with official organizations to increase the prestige and renown of the Midnight Inn on all levels. Now, if any of you have any ideas or questions, you may state them. Without a second's hesitation, the turtle spoke. I have a question, Innkeeper. What is that box on your table, and why does it feel so attractive? The turtle had ignored everything the innkeeper said, and had eyes only for the box that his previous esteemed guest had left behind. Chapter 1533 Non-Renewable Resources. The innkeeper turned to look at the box, even as the gardener and Ash turned to look as well. The rest of them could feel nothing from the box, for it was supposed to be a perfect insulator, lest the primordial aura trapped within fades. That, of course, did nothing to prevent the turtle from being able to sense the primordial aura, because why did making sense matter to the turtle? That is the gabana fruit from the primordial garden, said the innkeeper with a fond smile. It is a gift from another guest, hoping to establish a working partnership with me. The turtle continued to stare at it for a while, almost as if lost in thought, until eventually its shoulders slumped as if depressed. I cannot create an environment suited to nurturing that fruit seed. How disappointing. The innkeeper chuckled, and then held out his hand and allowed the box to float to him. As much as he would like to just give the fruit to the turtle, he had other uses for it if he decided to ever use it to begin with. Plus, for the first time ever, he had encountered a situation where even a sovereign was helpless, so it was probably pointless to give it the fruit anyway. The moment Lex touched the box, however, something unexpected, yet totally predictable happened. He heard the familiar sound of new notifications. The only thing that surprised him was that it wasn't a single notification, but the sound of multiple notifications. Lex, however, ignored the notifications for now, despite really wishing to look at them. He didn't want to distract himself at the moment. He had no doubt that he'd received a quest or 2, but wanted to finish one quest before focusing on the next. He sent the box into his spatial ring. You should not worry over such things, said the innkeeper, as if consoling the turtle. Life has a way of working things out. Besides, right now, you're focused on the project of recreating a heaven. If you started to recreate primordial aura, I don't think you'd be able to focus on or complete either of them. The turtle looked away with a clearly forlorn expression that made it look adorable, causing the innkeeper to chuckle. It wasn't every day that he saw the turtle lose out on what it wanted. In fact, this may possibly be the only time he would ever see such a thing. Thus he enjoyed the moment, but then got back into the thick of things. Like I said, if you have any questions, you can ask them now. Ash raised her hand, which made the innkeeper chuckle again. You don't need to raise your hand, Ash. Go ahead, what do you want to ask? Designing special services to promote and strengthen mortals is not tough. Everything within the Midnight Inn, from the air, to the dirt and the water, to everything else practically improves mortals in every conceivable way. So what I need to know is the parameters of the services to design. What resources from the Midnight Inn should I utilize? Using the more common resources is fine, but looking at things long-term, depending on the number of mortals we help, there will come a time where we will start to even run out of dirt. It may be 1,000 years from now, or 100,000 years from now, but each grain of dirt used to initialize a mortal's bloodline is a grain of dirt we're never getting back. Your point is valid, said the innkeeper appreciatively. But the resources from the midnight inn are not as non-renewable as you think. To answer your question, all resources can be utilized. From the air, dirt and water, like you said, to the rarer and more valuable elixirs, resin, minerals, and ores, all can be used to create new services that can help our guests. This will actually require an element of research and development as well, for we have never really utilized all our resources to help mortals like this, and the possibilities for how they can be utilized is endless. That is, in fact, why I also asked the gardener to come to this meeting as well. While the turtle can help by designing environments which can be used for the mortals, empowering them despite not reaching a full heaven state, the gardener's deep understanding of all the various environments and resources, and how they can be used in conjunction with one another. Rather than worrying about that, what you need to do is focus on the price points for each service. Compared to our other services, such as healing and training, any service we come up with that utilizes the resources of the inn itself needs to be at a much higher price point. Specifically, the price should reflect the rarity of what our service achieves. With the various rewards being offered to the soldiers fighting within the Midnight Games, there has already been a lot of marketing for what we can offer. What I want you to do now is prepare 3 such services to launch during the Midnight Games finale. While Ash and the gardener reflected on what the innkeeper said, Lex's thoughts went back to the matter of what Ash had pointed out. The resources of the inn could not be used indefinitely. Even the grains of dirt, as numerous as they were, would eventually run out if they kept being reused without being replenished. It may take trillions of guests to do so, but the universe was not lacking in mortals. It was something he had already considered. In fact, what Lex had thought about was the fact that as the Midnight Realm matures, it would slowly lose out of the numerous rarities a newborn realm offers. Obviously, in exchange, the upper limit of the realm would grow, and the realm itself would move towards stabilization. That was the ultimate trade-off in a realm's life cycle. The individual worth of the average item in the realm would be reduced, and it would contain less energy, but the realm itself was more stable. That did not mean that mature realms did not contain absolutely incredible treasures. Naturally, that was not the case. This was only a comparison of averages. The point, however, was that one day the Midnight Realm would lose the many valuable resources it had. Lex thought about harvesting and mining them all, but then ultimately decided on a better solution. One was to gain more information about realms and their maturing process, something Ripley, the auditor from the bank, had pointed out that the inn worker sorely needed. The second was, well, he was a system user, so it would be pretty pointless if he didn't use the system. To be more accurate, his system had gained a very powerful feature called realm law replication. He had used it once before to copy the laws in a special region within the Midnight Realm where the laws behaved in such a way that everything was two-dimensional. Within the Midnight Inn, Lex had created a special zone, and anyone who entered that region would experience the special laws of that 2D zone. He had thought about using that very feature to copy the laws of the Midnight Inn, and then permanently create a zone that would forever have the special laws of a newborn realm. There was one reason why he hadn't done it yet, though. The realm law replication worked to perfectly copy the laws operating within a certain zone, but perhaps because it perfectly copied the laws of its targeted zone, it would not need to be used twice in the same area. As such, if Lex copied down the laws of the Midnight Realm as it was right now, later on if the realm developed certain laws that he wanted to capture, he would be unable to do so. This was an unexpected quirk of the feature, and Lex had looked into finding various loopholes in it, such as capturing the laws of the Midnight Realm within a certain region to capture the laws of a newborn realm. Yet due to the nature of the laws, the feature recognized any space with the same laws as a single region, even if Lex only targeted a small area of it. Ultimately, he had decided to wait until he was certain of what he would gain or lose out by copying the laws of the realm at any given time. Once the laws were replicated, he would be able to, theoretically, harvest resources from that specially created zone indefinitely. Just in case things did not work out like that, Lex needed to think of other ways to replenish the Midnight Realm as he used its resources. Unfortunately, information related to realms and their development was not something that was readily available, so it was up to him to figure things out. Fortunately, however, he already had some ideas as to how he could do such a thing. As I expect these services will be out of the means of most mortals themselves, we need to come up with alternate payment plans. Naturally, those mortals who are sponsored by more powerful organizations won't have any such problems. But for those who aren't, I intend on offering them trials to pay for the services instead. Chapter 1534 Hidden Features. To avail the services of the inn that could totally transform the power and ability of a mortal, the price was way more than something a mortal could typically actually afford. There were a few different reasons for this. Lex was not merely copying the strategy used by the resort, though they had probably mastered the art of demand and supply. The price was determined by the resource used. The other services offered by the inn were run by the system, so Lex did not need to worry about how to manage them. These services, however, which required him to provide the materials himself, had to be priced based on the resources used. Naturally, everything within the inn was invaluable based solely on the fact that it was a newborn realm, if nothing else. Another reason was that such services simply couldn't be made available en masse. By appropriately pricing them, they could ensure that the drain on the resources would be reduced drastically. Lastly, he could encourage his guests to take the trials if they couldn't afford the price of the service. Trials were a feature of the inn Lex unlocked long ago, but hardly made use of. Back in the day, he used a trial to get Marlowe to procure a bunch of zombie cores for him, and in exchange he healed Marlowe. Since then, Lex hardly ever needed to use trials because honestly offering MP through the guild room was usually enough to motivate them to get whatever he wanted from them. Ever since he got over his initial hurdle of MP shortage, he'd never encountered a situation where MP itself couldn't resolve things. Now, however, he decided to make use of the massive labor force that trials gave him access to. Sure, he could send them off to various battlefields across the Origin realm and come back with valuable fertilizer, but Lex was a peaceful fellow, not a warmonger. Why would he do something like that? Instead, for now, he'd decided to use free labor he could acquire from trials, and have his guests map out the hundreds of thousands of minor realms that the inn was connected to. Each one of those minor realms, influenced by the birth of the Midnight Realm, had been nourished by the energies of the newborn realm and acted as a reserve of resources. For now, understanding what they contained was more than enough. In the future, they could make use of them. As for replenishing the resources of the Midnight Realm itself, Lex's idea was to use high-quality fertilizer to nourish the realm time and time again. This was, obviously, not a perfect solution. But it would work for now. In that case, on such short notice, if we need to launch 3 new services, we will need to make use of the resources we already know of, in increasing order or rarity. First and most common service we can offer is to have a bloodline stimulation or strengthening service using the dirt from the inn. The second, rarer service we can offer mortals is body strengthening using the powder from a crushed boulder. That should provide them with a sufficiently strengthened body, regardless of what race they hail from. Lastly, and the most expensive service we can offer is to improve their affinity or talent for spiritual energy using the silt that gathers on the Spirit Stone Mountains. A single speck of that should be able to turn even the densest, least talented mortal into a once-in-a-generation genius. Excellent. Set it up, but don't make the service too readily available, said the innkeeper. Set only 1 or 2 locations within the inn where these services can be offered, and add a number of preparatory steps before and after the actual service. For example, cleaning the body and mind, meditating to achieve the right state of mind, and priming the body for change. The more details you add, and the more seriously you take this, the more the guests who avail this service will feel like they're receiving something special. With that, the first steps to establishing the 3 new services were set, though Ash had to now deal with something those at the Midnight Inn had rarely done before. She had to deal with logistics. Fortunately, she was more than up to the task. But that was just one of the 3 new changes that the innkeeper had proposed. The turtle and the gardener needed to work on making their gardens aura sufficient to affect mortals, even if it was nowhere near becoming a true heaven. Discussing that took longer than it would normally need, mostly because the turtle was still morose over the fruit it could not prepare the environment for. The gardener, too, was not helpful though for an entirely different reason. Lately, 2 guests had been hounding the gardeners, begging him incessantly to take them as his disciples. It was the 2 werewolf kids who had come to the inn so long ago. By now they had grown up, and were more than eligible to return to their families and participate in the ongoing wars. In fact, they had done that for a while. But war could not satiate them the way farming did, and so they had returned to the inn, begging the gardener to teach them his ways. But the gardener was not interested in taking on disciples. As a result, he was stuck with them constantly badgering him. Of course, none of that had anything to do with their meeting right now, but it had caused the gardener to be distracted. He was just grateful that lately none of his art had been destroyed or demolished. Life could be worse. Ultimately, though, the meeting concluded. While Ash seemed more than ready to take on the challenges he had given out, the gardener and the turtle did not inspire a great deal of confidence in Lex. Fortunately, he had just the tool needed to break the turtle out of its little mental slump. Lex took out the brimming dream lotus, and told the turtle to ensure it does not wilt. The word seed lotus grew pretty easily on Lex's back, but the brimming dream lotus needed to absorb strands of divine energy to support it and its ability, so it couldn't be planted just anywhere. In return, it offered a spectacular ability that even the resort made use of. It allowed someone to enter a trance-like state, or something akin to a vivid dream. Such a state could be used for various purposes, from enlightenments, to leaving behind legacies and inheritances, to many other opportunities. The challenge was just the kind of distraction the turtle needed, for to nurture the lotus, he would need to especially focus on the environment in the heaven he wanted to create. Considering that Lex wanted to use the brimming dream lotus for services in the future as well, this also counted as preparation for the future. More importantly, he had a feeling that there was some kind of connection between the various lotuses in the Primordial Origin Lotus series. He wouldn't know for certain, but he got the feeling that they could mutually promote each other's growth. If that were true, then his own lotus which was bonded to him would speed up its fusion with the realm with the help of the brimming dream lotus. If that happened, then he could use his lotus help to replenish the resources of the realm. Lex sat in his office chair for a moment, contemplating the meeting he had just had, and anything else left he might need to do. Once he was certain he'd taken care of everything, he finally turned his attention towards the notifications. He had a fairly strong idea about what they would entail. Since the premise that the system operated on was entertainment, and that usually came at the cost of his sanity, then it would be something along the lines of somehow connecting the inn to the primordial garden. He was right. He was also wrong. New notification: primordial energy detected. Primordial energy scale unlocked. Primordial energy scale. A scale to determine how much primordial energy the system has absorbed. When the scale reaches 100, hidden features of the system will be unlocked. New notification: new quest category unlocked, joint quests. Joint quests. Some quests are too great for a single system user, and some quests are too important to fail. Joint quests are quests given to multiple system users at the same time. Joint quests are mandatory, except where a veto token is used, and failure will lead to system devolution. New quest: complete the primordial energy scale to 100. Quest reward: hidden features of system unlocked. Remarks: do not ATET 998 happy face 88 and N0, and %7. New quest: a new realm of possibilities has been detected. Connect the midnight inn to the primordial garden. Quest reward: Innkeeper's reading glasses. Remarks: it's called the Midnight Inn, not hide in your closet forever inn. Expand the inn's reach and accept new guests. Chapter 1535 More Mysteries. Lex blinked as he read the notifications, but the notifications weren't over just yet. New notification: special material detected. Submit special material to the system to trigger a special quest. New quest, accelerate the system's recovery by absorbing primordial energy. Quest reward, Midnight Monument. Remarks, if you're too lazy to do it, at least allow the system to recover on its own. New notification, additional tasks/quests/rewards blocked due to insufficient system functionality. Lex stared at that last notification for a long while, unable to discern if it was a good thing or not. While, in general, the system had only been good for him, each one of its rewards and quests came with great personal risk on his behalf. Of course, all of that is also what enabled him to become so much stronger than all other cultivators to begin with, so he couldn't really complain. It was just that he had to make sure he didn't get pulled in over his head, ending up facing problems even he couldn't resolve. He read all the notifications again, allowing his thoughts to run freely as he speculated on why there had been such a significant result of him encountering primordial energy. The first thing he focused on was the primordial energy scale. It was a scale, not a completion or percentage bar, which meant that the amount of energy it could hold was much greater than mere 100. The fact, then, that some hidden features of the system would be unveiled at 100, whatever that signified, could signify that even greater rewards awaited him if he continued to tip the scale. Now whether he had to achieve 200 to get those additional benefits, or 1,000, or even 10,000, or possibly greater, that was something he could only find out by actually achieving it first. It was also interesting that mere exposure to primordial energy allowed him to unlock the joint quest feature, something he had many thoughts about. Yet this point was something he found very interesting. Lex had always been curious about the history of systems, and yet no one seemed to know their origin. The system itself surely had some information pertaining to its origin, but the system was uncooperative about it. The significantly detailed and complex nature of each system indicated to Lex that there was some great mastermind, if not a number of them, behind the system. Yet if one day he discovered that systems were just a part of the universe itself and came into being alongside the universe, he wouldn't be so surprised. Yet whether they were born alongside the universe or not, Lex had every reason to believe that they had been around for a very long time. It would not be an exaggeration to say that Lex suspected that the systems came into being during the primordial age. Now, due to how long it had been since that age, Lex didn't know exactly what the universe was like back then. However, he felt safe in assuming that primordial energy was at least quite abundant back then, if not making up the majority of the spiritual energy back then. If that was the case, then systems were originally made or designed in an environment with plenty of primordial energy, and didn't actually run on full power in its absence, at least unless whoever designed the systems anticipated that primordial energy would one day fade. Either way, it wasn't a stretch to say that the systems ran on primordial energy as its main or original energy source. This theory was supported by his quest to accelerate the system's recovery by providing it with primordial energy. Although it wasn't much, Lex felt like he had uncovered one of the numerous veils of mystery surrounding the systems, giving him a bit of insight into their operations and origins. It was also scary to think about. If systems were so powerful without primordial energy, he couldn't imagine what they would be like with it. Speaking of energies, there was another type of energy that Lex had encountered once that the system greatly coveted. Back when he wanted to fix his cultivation technique so that he could continue to cultivate, and not die stuck at a single realm, he had done so by transferring Proto's energy to his cultivation technique. Back then, he recalled that his system also wanted it, promising a return to 100% functionality in exchange. To be more accurate, he had received 1 plank Protos, with plank being the smallest unit of energy possible, at least as far as he knew. That meant that whatever Proto's energy was, it was much more potent than primordial energy even. Yet he had never even heard mention of it. Primordial energy marked an entire age of the universe, with the name primordial carrying an immense weight even now, yet Protos, which was apparently even greater than primordial, had no mention whatsoever. It was highly interesting, and Lex wanted to look into it some more, but his instincts warned him to do so subtly. This was not the kind of thing he could easily ask questions about, or arouse any attention towards. Next, Lex turned his attention to joint quests. The mandatory nature caused a feeling of revulsion in Lex, reminding him of his early days where the consequence of failure meant death. The punishment was nowhere nearly as severe in this case, but it was severe nonetheless. Lex had never encountered another system anywhere near his own in ranking, and he didn't want to lose that advantage by having it suffer devolution. In fact, Lex was fairly certain his system's rank played a significant role in keeping itself hidden. He couldn't afford such a punishment at all, so he either had to do the quests, or get his hands on a veto token. Veto tokens were, however, not available in the token shop, which was a shame. Another thing that aroused his curiosity was the statement that some missions were too important to fail. What made them so important? Who decided the relative value of a quest? This was yet another mystery waiting for him to solve. Chapter 1536. What do you think? Speaking of mysteries, the notification that told Lex to get his hands on some special material to trigger a special quest was not a new one. To be more specific, when he had seen Belial, the Craven Prince, the remarks on his status stated that he had some special material on him, and that acquiring it would trigger a special mission. Considering the Crystal Realm's connection to the Primordial Garden, not to mention the connection between the Craven and Ventura, who had a monopoly on said garden, Lex could easily surmise that the special material was either related to the garden, or primordial energy. Speaking of which, the system seemed particularly desperate to get its hand on some of that energy, going as far as to offering Lex one of the few things he specifically requested for. Back when Lex was dealing with the pressure of having to read letters from Dao Lords, he had mentioned that having protective Innkeeper glasses that would save him from the influence of the Dao would surely come in handy. The system, at the time, had not responded to his request. But now that it wanted something from him, it knew exactly what to dangle in front of his face. Speaking of mysteries, there was that little, small, barely consequential mystery of why the system was trying to tell him not to attempt this quest just yet. Why had the system tried to warn him, and why had it failed? That was not suspicious at all. Lex's generally relaxed demeanor and lack of any concern was totally because this wasn't an issue, and not because he had just become numb to these things. Lex resisted the urge to massage his forehead, and instead summoned Mary. "Hey Mary, you can turn your senses back on now," he said, allowing the projection to appear in front of him, wearing a very elaborate suit of armor. It bore the emblem of the Midnight Inn, though the colors were pastels instead of the traditional gold. "Is it finally over?" she asked, lifting her helmet's visor. "It's been over for a while," said Lex. "I need to update you on a few things, a few unrelated things. I want your opinion, if you can share it, on the matter." "I don't envy your situation," Mary said, taking off her helmet entirely now that she knew that a certain guest had left. "The system went through a change and offered me a couple of quests. That part's not unusual. What's unusual is that access to primordial energy is what initiated such a big change, and I'm pretty sure that the system itself tried to warn me not to complete its own quest." Mary whistled, as if what she was hearing sounded tough. Yet her relaxed demeanor also portrayed that she didn't think the situation was so serious. "Tell me what you can," she said, looking curious. "Primordial energy is quite rare nowadays. It's questionable whether it even exists in the primary realm anymore, a question I can't answer since I've never been. There are very few spots in the universe with confirmed presence of primordial energy, and all of them are incredibly difficult to reach, if not entirely impossible. Even I've never had a run-in with it, despite handling a few remains and artifacts from the primordial age. Well, the primordial garden, you know, the one connected to the crystal realm, definitely has some. But, let's put those things aside. The moment I touched a container carrying some primordial energy, I unlocked something called the primordial scale, and apparently if I bring it to 100, it will unlock some hidden features of the system, hidden features that I'm pretty sure the system warned me not to get within the remarks. Speaking of hidden features, I also unlocked something called joint quests. You know anything about that? According to the description, they're for quests too important to fail, which does not really sound like the modus operandi of the system so far. What else am I missing? Oh yes, for the second time the system told me about some special materials that can unlock a special quest if I get my hands on them. Oh, and also, apparently getting my hands on some primordial energy can speed up the system's recovery. Yes, I think that about covers it from my end. What do you think about all of this? Lex expected Mary to know quite a bit about his situation, but as he saw her sit down with a frown, he got the feeling that he had entered a territory even she was unfamiliar with. What is it? Lex asked when she didn't answer for a while. You remember the bits I've told you about my past? About my prior experience with systems. What I had was an undamaged system, meaning it was far more powerful than what you are currently using. Even so, I've never encountered a joint quest before, nor have I ever heard any hints of it. Moreover, the act of the system warning you not to complete a quest, that doesn't make sense. You remember how particular it was about not breaking the rules? Despite having souls, systems are meant to operate under a certain set of rules. This is new territory, even for me. What are your thoughts? Primordial energy is clearly the key in this matter. Even though I have accessed many other energy types, even those technically just as powerful and potent as primordial energy, such as chaos energy, I never triggered anything like this. I cannot advise you not to complete a quest. All I can say is that you need to use your own discretion on this matter. It's good that you feel this way, said Lex. I'm pretty sure this poses a huge risk, one that I'm probably far from ready to deal with right now. But, given what I've learned about the powerful organizations of the universe, and how they're probably already planning on taking over the inn in the next few 100,000 years, likely already laying the plans, I cannot afford to be hesitant. I'm going to start doing my research and getting ready to connect to the primordial garden. I feel like I'm going to find a lot of answers to many of my questions over there. Chapter 1537 Plan of Action. Oh? Mary said, looking at Lex curiously. I thought you'd want to avoid it. So far, you've done your best to hide inside the inn and avoid trouble as much as possible. What changed? Lex chuckled. That was only possible as long as the trouble was outside the inn. Now that I have trouble right here with me inside the inn itself, hiding won't do me any good. The only thing I can do is to become as strong as possible, as quick as possible. Completing system quests usually goes a long way in helping with that. But that doesn't mean that I'm going to go into this without any preparation. I need to have as much information about the garden and Ventura's relationship to it as possible. I also want to know the crystal race's situation there, and the kind of dynamic that place has. Moreover, I need to maximize my personal strength as well. I've received a few new skills, but I'm nowhere close to mastering them. Finally, we need to take precautions for what I might encounter inside the garden. I have to look into how I can connect the inn to the garden. Although I have a fruit from that place which I can potentially use to buy a ticket, we already know of another way in there. We have to decide which method of entry will give us the most advantage. There's one more thing you need to do before you go there, Mary said, adding in. Or, at least, that's my advice. You need to upgrade the system enough that it gives you a quicker, more efficient way to connect a realm to the inn. I fear connecting a place like the primordial garden, which is notoriously difficult to find, will take centuries if not millennia if you do it the traditional way. That is far from ideal, said Lex. He pulled up his latest quests and looked at them once again. I think we will need to find access to primordial energy. If I can complete the quest about accelerating the inn's repair without completing the one about the primordial scale, we can make some progress towards that goal. Repairing the system at this point is too tough. I haven't encountered any other materials that could allow me to repair the system in a long time, so bolstering its self-repairability might just be the best option. There's also the possibility of getting such a reward through quests. I will have to acquire and complete new quests if I want a feature like that. Fortunately, we don't have a strict timeline to adhere to, so we can take our time with the preparations. Lex paused, for he got some feedback from his host attire about something that was happening inside the inn. I think, for now, we should focus on concluding the midnight games, and after that we can begin our preparations for this. I just got news, Luther is on his way back. If everything goes well, I think we can have a launch event for the dungeons feature right after the midnight games. Lex had long subscribed to the plan of constantly having events so that he can hire event security for the inn. Even though he had a few earth immortals at the inn now, he had no heavenly immortals, not to mention celestial immortals. As such, having the Reaving Dread mercenaries run security for him was a good fallback. Besides a single occasion, he'd never had any problems with them either. Oh, and we need to look into the Karen race as well. I want to know all there is to know about them. With his plans made, Lex was feeling good about his immediate future. It was nice to take control of things for once, rather than have them thrown at him while he was least prepared. While Mary disappeared to carry out his instructions, Lex turned his attention back to the Go board, his expression becoming a little more intense. He had never been one to give up on revenge. He just needed to think of the best way to do so. "Hold the line, damn it," yelled a beast in the shape of a lion, only its body seemed to be made of magma rock. All around him, hundreds of other beasts fought ferociously, living up to the reputation of the Reaving Dread mercenaries. Unfortunately for them, they were facing a horde of chimera, and their ferocity seemed too much for their partners. They screamed, they shouted, but that did not help them against the onslaught they were facing. "Retreat, damn it, I'll cover you," the magma lion yelled as he ran towards them, but he was too slow, or maybe the chimera were too fast. Soon, the small team of mercenaries from the Reaving Dread were left alone. "Retreat. Full retreat. Move back slowly and systematically, don't show the enemy your backs or we'll all be dead," the lion roared in frustration. No matter how great of a fighter he was on his own, he couldn't fight an entire army by himself. "Boss, that's the third wave of reinforcements we've lost," said an exhausted-looking liger as he approached the fearsome beast. Compared to the glowing red body of the magma lion, his normal, mundane body of tissue and flesh looked much less imposing, especially considering how much smaller he was. "I know how to count, damn it. Just pray that whoever comes next can handle themselves. If we have to keep throwing bodies at these damn chimera, even the Reaving Dread mercenaries will begin to run short of hands. We'll have to withdraw from some of our other contracts. What are we even doing here, boss? I say we just suffer the loss and abandon this commission. This is bad luck." The lion shook his head, looking troubled. "I don't know," the lion muttered. All the condottiere said was that this was a quest he could not reject. The liger whined a little more, but then soon returned to fighting off the chimera. The battlefield was no place to have a chat, and if they didn't retreat in a timely manner, they might not even be around by the time the next batch of reinforcements came. He just hoped that this time, whoever it was, they would survive a little longer. Chapter 1538 First Place. The damn, accursed Go board. Lex saw no resolution in sight, and he saw no way to keep himself safe from its influence. Lex had a very powerful cultivation technique, and he was confident in saying that it was likely the best, if not close to being the best one in the universe. Yet the Go board could find flaws in even that, causing him cultivation deviations whenever the rook piece was used. To be honest, Lex appreciated the opportunity to refine his strength further, but the timing of it was not the best. In fact, Lex suspected that his opponent had some way of detecting the most inopportune moment for Lex to use it. He had originally been hoarding beads in the hope that he could somehow transform them into a rook piece of his own. Now he'd changed his strategy. He was going to place as many beads on the board as possible, even if that made him vulnerable to more attacks. The reason was that with each bead placed, he'd learn a little more about the game. But, playing by the rules was stifling Lex. Since when had he done things the normal way? He was certain he could discover some loophole or flaw to exploit, it was just that he hadn't found it yet. If the Go board really was a consequence of a system, then Lex had finally faced a worthy adversary with a powerful system. The user of the murder system was entirely egomaniacal and incompetent, which had barely allowed Lex to survive his onslaught and counter-kill him. Yet such a powerful system in the hands of someone even remotely competent would be a devastating challenge. Sitting in his meditation room, Lex closed his eyes, while allocating a facet of his mind to focusing on the Go board. Another part of his consciousness was focusing on his newly acquired karmic eyesight, while another had appeared as a projection of the innkeeper in his office. There was yet another part of him that simply focused on cultivating. As an immortal, Lex's mind had strengthened incredibly, allowing him to be able to hold numerous concurrent streams of thought. It was about time he took advantage of it as much as possible. The innkeeper, sitting in his office, looked over the numbers of the midnight games. He wished he could say that the games were close, and the winner could not yet be determined, but that was far from the truth. While numerous worlds fought on countless battlefields, destroying the insect hordes that Sanguis Pluvia had bred across the years, some performed better than others. It was inevitable. Some fought only to gain points which could be used to upgrade their own powers and abilities, becoming stronger. Others fought to save their worlds. A bunch fought for money. Everyone had different reasons for fighting, and that often reflected in their effectiveness on the battlefield. None, however, were as effective as the Deathsworn family. A family, connected by oath and not blood, their numbers were not few. What was more important than their numbers, however, was their unparalleled combat prowess. They were not necessarily the most skilled fighters, or had the best techniques, but their fearlessness and combat synergy made it so that they were far more efficient in killing than anyone else. What's more, the fact that they could be supported by viewers, sent health and upgrade packages in critical moments, and receive support, made their already superior combat abilities multiply manyfold. It was like someone took a tiger, an apex predator, and taught it how to use nuclear bombs. Oddly enough, despite fighting the most recklessly, they had the fewest deaths. That meant that over the course of the midnight games, their strength had increased drastically, pushing their lead even further. No one was even close to matching their effectiveness in combat. The Deathsworn family alone had cleared over 200 battlefields. Their victory was all but determined, but they never slowed down at all, as if they couldn't care less about victory. In truth, Lex knew that the Deathsworn family consisted of a bunch of people who had sworn revenge, and cared for nothing other than revenge. The family had been made by those people who had achieved their revenge, and then created a family to help others who had been wronged attain their revenge. The target of their revenge need not be the same. Some sought revenge against organizations such as the Sanguis Pluvia, who wrought untold death and destruction, while others sought vengeance against individuals or powers who weren't necessarily evil. The target didn't matter, only that they were a group of individuals who had been pushed to the brink of their tolerance. Now, what to reward them, the innkeeper mused as he looked through the system event panel. In truth, he had many rewards he could offer, as the system generated the list on its own. But none of them seemed to match a family such as the Deathsworn. These rewards were more suited towards people who generally had some desires from life, whether it was a better life, the growth of their own families or organizations' powers, or anything along those lines. He wanted to give them something that would allow them to be self-sufficient in some regard, so as to be worthy of a reward from the inn. But the Deathsworn family, unlike other contenders, did not have a home planet, or a fixed base, or any kind of unified base. They were spread out across the origin realm, for just as they sought out revenge, many targeted the Deathsworn family. Only by hiding effectively could they ensure their survival. Maybe he should give them something to help them hide more effectively. Unable to decide on a suitable reward, Lex continued to peruse the panel. Comparatively, it was much easier to decide on the reward for second place, and those that placed lower. Lex, Orin has arrived as you requested, Mary said, appearing in front of him. Excellent. Send him in. Chapter 1539 I need something made. Orin I of the Vividal Mines, the first dwarf born in the Midnight Realm, the Hammer deity, walked into the innkeeper's office. Though the pressure outside the innkeeper's office was great, so great that Orin felt like the weight of the underground kingdom had been placed solely upon his shoulders, he did not stumble nor did he slow down. From the very early days of the Midnight Realm itself, Orin had forged and mined the very mountain storing Vividal ore itself. What weight had he not borne? What pressure had he not tolerated? When had he let the pressures and burdens of the world dictate him? Even the heavenly tree, in its prime, could not dictate Orin's actions. Of course, the heavenly tree and the innkeeper were incomparable. Oren understood well that the pressure he felt was not a deterrent or some grand display by the innkeeper. Instead, it was the innkeeper's mercy. By allowing his guests to overcome such an incredible hurdle, even if it was only a speck of his power, he made them feel like they had truly earned the right of an audience with the innkeeper. Such a feeling was very important. After all, if they did not feel like they earned the right of an audience, they may be overwhelmed by the grace of the innkeeper meeting them. This was a burden of those in power, something he understood well, as the leader of an entire race. When Oren stepped into the innkeeper's office, he wasn't sure what to expect, yet he certainly didn't expect to find the innkeeper so welcoming. His very presence was warm and disarming, causing Oren to subconsciously lower the guard of formality he had donned. The innkeeper turned to look at Oren, his handsome face wearing a soft smile. "Welcome, Oren, to my office. I hope you did not find it too troubling to visit me here. I have been looking forward to meeting you," he said, his tone and words so humble and Oren felt shaken to his core. Such humility was not what one would expect from a lord of an entire realm, a being of unimaginable power, capable of shaping the lands according to his will. "Nay, innkeeper. It is my utmost honor to visit your office in person. It is only right that I come to you. Please, there is no need to be formal. Relax. We can talk as friends here. Take a seat, I have some matters I would like to hear your thoughts about." Oren did not act pedantic. Since the innkeeper had asked him to relax, the dwarf relaxed, leaning into the chair opposite to the innkeeper's desk as if he was in a lounge. The dwarf couldn't help but instinctively wish that he had his usual mug of burnberry brew, and even before he completed the thought, a massive wooden mug wafting a familiar scent appeared right in his hand. Oren was surprised, and then ecstatic. Without a moment's hesitation he took a big swig from the mug, allowing the froth of the brew to coat his beard. "Ah, now that hits the spot. This is true hospitality, innkeeper. I see the reputation of the Midnight Inn is not in vain. I'm glad you enjoy it. In fact, I'm especially glad you enjoy it for a very specific reason. You see, I wish to build a very special forge within the inn. I plan on gathering the resources of the inn and creating a massive forge, fueled by divine energy, heated by dragon fire, quenched in the waters of the Chaos Sea, carved out of the very laws of the realm. But while I want to make such a forge, I also need someone who can use the forge." The innkeeper looked at Oren for a moment, but did not directly offer the job, even though it was implied. Instead, he continued to elaborate on his plans. "You see, even though some of the dwarves of your clan have cooperated with the inn before, the scale of the projects I wish to take on next is entirely different. Each and everyone would use only the most powerful resources that are finite and cannot be sourced over and over again. Each project would take countless years to create, and each one would be unique, perhaps in the whole universe. Projects like these I cannot assign to anyone I don't absolutely trust, and they also happen to be projects that absolutely cannot fail." "I understand what you're getting at, innkeeper," said Oren with a genuinely troubled expression. "The offer is incredibly tempting. With every fiber of my being, I can feel the anticipation towards each project that would be on such a scale, and yet I have a duty to my own people that I cannot just overlook. I am not just their leader, but also the deity who is at the center of their faith. Such responsibility. I cannot lightly give it up." "Oren, I think there is some kind of misunderstanding between you and I," said the innkeeper, his tone and demeanor still the same, not at all displeased by the dwarf's attempt to turn down the offer. "Working at the inn does not mean your previous life disappears. In fact, as far as being a deity and symbol of faith is concerned, the inn is actually actively developing a heaven so that deities may actively become a part of the inn without compromising their faith. If anything at all, joining the inn will allow you to grow to new heights, for yourself and for your race and followers. But, I do not want to pressure you, or feel like you must join the inn. The decision, ultimately, is yours. The forge, we will continue to make. It is just that the treasures we need to refine will have to wait until another worthy of such a task can be found." Oren looked troubled, still unsure of what to do, though the news of a heaven being formed inside the inn helped lighten his mood a lot. Can I ask what treasure you want to forge?" Oren asked hesitantly. The innkeeper nodded, though for once his expression turned incredibly solemn. "There are many I need forged, but the first one I want made is a karmic bead." The innkeeper showed Oren an image of a simple, black bead that looked like an ordinary go bead, yet from the image Oren could feel a power he could not fathom even with his divinity. The dwarf's breathing quickened and his eyes began to turn red. Chapter 15. 41st ingredient. Oren's eyes were glued onto the image, and only part of it was because the mere pressure from the image froze his body. In truth, he saw a lot more than just the surface of the image. He saw what it was meant to be. But the power in that bead, it was too great. It far surpassed Oren, and while theoretically he could create items and treasures stronger than himself, the difference could not be so great. Slowly, the image of the bead faded, and Oren turned his eyes to the innkeeper who was observing him with amused eyes. That is too powerful. There is no way I can create something like that, not before I become much stronger." "No, that is your misconception," said the innkeeper warmly. "The power you were feeling from the projection, actually that aura itself was also a part of the projection. The bead does not have to have such power. Instead, it is a mere conduit for karma, and thus should be able to tolerate such a strain. In truth, the bead itself will have no power. But the details of the project, well, it's better I only discuss it with whoever is in charge of actually producing it. Do not worry, Oren, I will not implicate you as far as my treasures are concerned. If you do not wish to join the inn, then that is your freedom." The innkeeper sounded entirely sincere, but that only made Oren more conflicted. He had his duty that he could not overlook, yet the temptation of creating such amazing treasures had grabbed his heart, and refused to let go. The innkeeper had even made it easier for him by letting him know that joining the inn would not conflict with performing his duties, though Oren could not help but feel that he was overlooking something. Indeed, he really was overlooking something very important. Every action a deity took was very significant, and had the chance to possibly influence their lore or faith, becoming a part of the stories told about a deity. It wasn't like it was impossible for a deity to serve another, but should that happen, it would become a part of that deity's gospel, and thus a measure of power and faith that was supposed to go to the deity was transferred to whoever they served. It was a big decision, not lightly taken. Yet Oren's brain, at the moment, wasn't working to full capacity, for even with the projection faded, all he saw with his eyes was that black bead. Meanwhile, Lex silently watched as Oren shepherded himself exactly to the decision Lex wanted from him. Lex had not been deceitful about why he wanted Oren, though perhaps he hadn't painted the full picture either. Since he was working on completing quests now, he decided to put more effort into all the quests, including the one about forming a heaven and a hell. Since divine energy would be needed to develop the heaven, it only made sense for Lex to hire some of the local deities to help out with its creation. Oren was one of the easier deities to persuade. The other deities within the Midnight Realm, while still deferential to the innkeeper, had a bit of an attitude problem and would require more work to be convinced. Lex would, naturally, put that work in, but at a later date. Right now, he wanted to hire Oren for another, much more urgent reason. He did not like playing by the rules, and while he was limited to what he could do on the go board, that is only how things appeared to be. Karma was a law of the universe so powerful that even his cultivation technique, as amazing as it was, could do nothing to it. More importantly, the go board connected Lex and that other Nas race member, forming a sort of contract between them. He did not believe that he couldn't use that to his favor somehow. Of course, at the moment Lex lacked the comprehensive understanding of karma required to somehow take advantage of it. That didn't mean he couldn't take advantage of it. Oren was a great blacksmith, but creating something worth his skill was not a product of a day or a week or a month. Besides the time taken to just gather the right materials, it would take years. Considering the fact that karma was such a difficult concept to properly grasp, to make a tool that could serve as a conduit for karma might even take decades or more. Hopefully, Lex would be able to resolve the go board long before then. But if he wasn't able to do so, he'd rather get started on the solution right now rather than later. Oren gulped, wiped the sweat off his brow, finished chugging his burnberry brew, and then looked at the innkeeper with an intense gaze. "You know what, I changed my mind," said the deity of hammers, slamming his mug down as he did. "I think joining the inn would be the best way to grow my strength, and thus the best way to benefit my people. I will join the Midnight Inn." The innkeeper's smile widened as he took out a platinum key and handed it to Oren. "You must first take the test, but I have faith in you. Once you complete the test, we can begin planning on how to craft the karmic bead. Oh, but I'll give you one hint to motivate you. To set the foundation of the bead, I'll be using this." The innkeeper held out his hand, opening it to reveal a small nugget of amber-colored resin. The dwarf's pupils dilated, and though he didn't know what he was looking at, his entire being was suddenly filled with an unquenchable thirst for that resin. He wanted to absorb it, as if doing so would elevate him to a whole new level of power. Yet greed did not blind him. Instead, it brought an immense amount of fear into his heart. He had no idea what he was looking at, but he finally understood why the innkeeper needed to hire him before making him work. Who else could be trusted with such a secret? Chapter 1541 About Time. Oren crushed the platinum key and vanished, gone to take the test to join the Midnight Inn. Lex withdrew his projection of the amber chaos resin, and leaned back in his chair. He didn't have many pieces of the resin left, and each one was beyond extremely valuable. The reason he was willing to use it for the creation of this bead was because Lex had taken a great interest in karma and intended on using it long-term. Unlike Arrays, which had once served him very well but ultimately reached a plateau in terms of strength, he felt like he could use karma indefinitely. The reason Arrays plateaued in strength, he eventually discovered, was because the characters that Arrays were formed of were a sort of manifestation of certain aspects of specific laws. One could even say that using laws was an upgraded and more potent version of using Arrays. But karma was karma. There was no upgraded or deteriorated version of it, and was so powerful that even Dao Lords feared and respected it. Such a field was worth learning and investing in. A gleam flashed through Lex's eyes as he thought about his future plans. While he did not think that he was worth studying, the way Lakandaroth had claimed he would be studied, but it was true that Lex was perhaps at his best when he was planning some kind of revenge. What could he say? Vengeance was a motivator unlike any other. "Mary, send in the next appointment," he said, getting back into the innkeeper persona. John walked into the innkeeper's office, his expression neutral, though Lex could see enough to tell that he was pleased. John had slowly faded out of view from daily life at the inn after he lost his system, though after a chat with the innkeeper, he eventually found his drive to return to his former self. The problem he was facing was that even though his cultivation had fallen, his tenets had remained the same. That meant that even if he regained his cultivation, he would have to continue on the path that his system had set out for him. For a very long time, John had been training and cultivating, back from scratch. He had been sent to the temple of fasting the moment the inn opened back up so that he could get even better guidance than before. Now, finally, he had returned to his former peak cultivation, though without his system, his strength was not what it used to be. "How are you adjusting?" the innkeeper asked warmly. John looked at the innkeeper for a moment, and then sighed. "It's good to have my strength back, but I feel a little lost these days." "It's because you have spent too much time in isolation. What you need to do now is return to the inn, and allow yourself to rest as you interact with the inn workers and its guests. Your own assistant, Do, has specifically stated that he wants to continue working with you, so should you reopen the battle axe, he will resume his old post." John hesitated for a moment, but then nodded. "Do you feel ready to resume work properly?" the innkeeper asked, his tone becoming slightly more solemn. "Yes, that's the one thing I have no doubts about. Until I surpass my old self, I'll always feel incomplete. Working will help distract me from that." "Good. In that case, I'm going to be sending you to the 2 rhino centaurs. They're going to give you a device that will help you detect systems. Your new job, when you're not running the battle axe, will be to covertly search for system users in the origin realm who are very liberal with their morals when using their systems. John's expression also turned solemn as his fists tightened. You only have to find them, and nothing else. This is what we're going to do. The innkeeper informed John about his role in an elaborate plan, where hardly anyone involved within actually knew what they were doing. In fact, even John himself did not know what the end goal for searching for system users was. All he knew was that from time to time, someone would forward him a list of leads from across the origin realm. The Midnight Inn had already been connected to many random planets in the origin realm, and Lex planned on increasing his reach by connecting to random planets across the galaxies. Once John had a lead, he would use the lifetime of experience in covert operations to secretly scan the target to detect if he was a system user or not using the device given to him by the Rhino Centaurs. The innkeeper informed him up front that the chances of actually finding a system user was less than 1 in 1,000, but the task needed to be done even so. In truth, what Lex had planned was an elaborate scheme. Since the two Rhino Centaurs needed systems to upgrade their security clearance to get more information, Lex had more or less decided to get them a couple of weak systems. Of course, Lex was not a thief. He would not go around stealing systems from any random system user he came across. Lex had, in fact, let a few system users even go despite discovering them. However, if the system user was a criminal, or a generally scummy person such as the Nas who had targeted Lex, then there was no harm in dealing with them. Up until now, he'd been reluctant to repair his system because the stronger it was, the more forceful it would be with his quests. Although the system stopped doing it, he couldn't forget what it felt like when the system had warned him that the punishment for failing a quest was death. Although, by now, the system didn't do stuff like that anymore, the arrival of the joint quest proved that mandatory quests were still a thing. It was best to be careful. Yet caught in the web of powerful organizations, Lex had no choice but to power up. Besides, it was better to know the location of a bunch of systems and not need them, than to need them and not be able to find them. He had tasked Roland with finding anomalous people and organizations, in any regard, all across the origin realm. Such a general task was too difficult to quantify, for simply finding anomalous people was not enough. The anomaly factor had to be great enough for him to suspect the involvement of a system. He had come up with a complex mathematical formula to calculate how much a certain situation deviated from the norm. Only results that exceeded 250% of the norm could end up on the list of leads, which would then be forwarded to John. John would then verify their veracity and forward the list to the innkeeper. What to do with the list of confirmed system users after that was entirely up to Lex. Chapter 1542 Solving Minor Problems. Due to how effectively Lex was multitasking, he had one of the most productive times he'd ever had inside the inn. In fact, he realized that he should have been doing this from the start. Splitting his mind and carrying out a dozen different tasks using projections or weak clones basically caused him no strain, but what he achieved was significant. As the innkeeper, he was constantly having meetings one-on-one with many workers. Many of them had been with the inn from the start, and meeting them again allowed him to refresh their awe of the innkeeper. But even more of them had never actually met the innkeeper. With hundreds of thousands of workers at the inn, managing the millions of guests, it was obviously impossible to have a relationship with all of them in a short period of time. Yet now, by inviting them one at a time, Lex was slowly establishing that relationship between them and the innkeeper. He also either praised them on their work so far, or offered them some guidance on how they could do things better. While such a targeted interaction was not necessarily for the workers generated using the system, Lex had long since stopped doing that. He had been hiring more natural workers for years now, and while they caused the major issues, the difference between them was almost immediately perceptible. Much like the paladins and Diplo who had formed their operating bases within the inn, there was a tribe of elves who had more or less moved into the inn entirely. They sustained their expenses by working in the guild room, and then later on by having a large number of their members join the inn. Their history was a tragic one. Unlike most of their kin, they did not love nature, nor did they have a strong affinity for natural things. Instead, their zeal towards technology was so strong they practically worshipped it. They had mostly lived a nomadic life before coming to the inn, but the moment they came to the inn and saw the massive flying spaceship, they had turned this into their home. So far, none of this had caused any problems. As workers they were skilled and obedient, and had their own strength to back themselves up. By joining the inn, they had immediately bolstered its strength and added some diversity. Although most of their stronger members were in the nascent realm, some of them were in the earth immortal realm, which back in the day was a great boost to the inn. The budding problem now, that Lex had detected before it became too big of an issue, was that as they were becoming more comfortable at the inn, and shedding their former submissive and fearful personalities caused by a lifetime of living on the run, they were beginning to turn more aggressive. The fear that had gripped their tribe for so long was now slowly morphing into hate and anger. With the feeling that they had now established themselves in a safe environment, and found themselves a backer, they were beginning to become more bold in their thoughts and actions. Growth and change were inevitable, but as the innkeeper, he needed to ensure that his workers understood that they could not discriminate against his guests. For those of their tribe who had not joined as workers he could do nothing, but they also needed to understand that having siblings, parents or friends as workers at the inn did not give them leeway to breaking the inn's rules. Fortunately, since Lex had detected this problem before it exploded into something serious, a one-on-one meeting with the workers from the tribe with the innkeeper was enough to rein in their growing arrogance. One good thing that came out of the elf's presence was that the inn's ability to create high-tech gear, or handle complicated machinery had increased manifold. Xeon, the Drake refiner who was a genius at creating spirit tech, had improved drastically after interacting with the elves, and they were already working on creating the inn's own spaceships. Much like with the elves, there were signs of budding problems all over the inn. Not a single one of them was too serious just yet, but if left unattended, had the potential to cause major issues down the road. One such potential problem was the high density of devils at the inn. They were, by far, the most respectful and law-abiding guests Lex had ever had at the inn. They were polite, friendly, and served to create a harmonious environment at the inn. But hidden beneath their friendly facade was an ulterior motive, and one that might actually be extremely sinister. Unfortunately, for this, Lex saw no solution. After all, they never broke any rules. Just as the inn had the potential to link to any place in the universe, the realm Garvets allowed the devils to teleport anywhere that they were summoned. The devils, taking advantage of their positive reputation at the inn, often made deals with various guests, teaching them the formations or rituals needed to summon them on their home planets. The thing was, once summoned, the devils did not cause problems or go on a rampage. No, they conducted business. Whoever summoned them often got what they wanted and were happy with their deals. But often, it was because they didn't know the true value of what they were offering. Considering that this was consensual business, conducted legally outside the inn, Lex had no grounds to stop it. No one was actually being harmed either. The problem that Lex detected was that the devil's influence in the origin realm was growing at an exponential rate as a result of this. He wasn't sure what kind of problem this could cause, but for all their amiability, Lex never forgot that the devils used humans to farm their demons. They weren't quite as docile as they appeared. Unfortunately, for now, all he could do was keep an eye on them. Chapter 1543 Growing Crowd. 2 days passed quietly with Lex simultaneously cultivating, researching karma, having meetings and solving many of the accumulated problems of the inn. It seemed like a lot of work, but Lex discovered that he found himself enjoying the process. Compared to traveling the universe, facing constant dangers and resolving the many conspiracies that filled every action of high-leveled cultivators, spending time at the inn was much more relaxing. Although he enjoyed the adrenaline rush and excitement he often faced, this was a different kind of enjoyment. It was so much so that Lex summoned 2 more clones, and had them take up 2 more jobs. Among the inner circle of the inn, for both guests and workers, it was more or less common knowledge now that Leo and Lex were the same people. But for the vast majority, they might know one or the other, but definitely not both. By now, many knew that Lex was a worker of the inn, even if they didn't know his specific job. Comparatively, the one more prominent Leo and owner of the gamer's den became someone very few knew about. However, now both Leo and Lex reappeared at the inn. The crowds at the inn were beginning to grow as two main events came close. The end of the midnight games had been announced. Or, to be more specific, the conditions for the games to end. Almost all battlefields had already been cleared, with only a little over 30 planets still at war. Once all of those battles were concluded, the games would officially come to an end. Such an announcement brought even more attention to those last few battlefields, bringing in even more viewers and thereby more gifts for the warriors. Simultaneously, the inn's income also shot up, and Lex now finally had an opportunity to slowly accumulate a bit of a surplus so that he was not broke after the games ended. But much sooner than the end of the games was the death match between Emperor Jotun and the leader of the fiery mammoths. Such a clash brought in spectators from all powers and races, not just those two powers. It was not every day that celestial immortals fought a publicly viewable battle, and as such, it attracted the attention of countless major powers. Even those who still remained unaware of the midnight and found out about it, while those who already knew about it took out time from their busy schedules to visit it. As the death match came closer, more and more from the Jotun Empire flocked to the inn, suddenly causing the number of guests in the inn to cross into the billions. All workers stopped taking holidays to handle the immense workload while Lex hired hundreds of millions of temporary workers from the event panel, draining the meager surplus he had managed to accumulate. But that drain was temporary. With so many guests, Lex expected to more than make up for his expenses. Among the many who had come to the inn to view the Emperor's fight, the family of Vigus Minima's governor were obviously included. Layla, the former leader of the Peacock Warriors, looked out at the midnight inn with complicated eyes, saying nothing, and merely reveling in her many childhood memories. Although, technically, she was still just a child. She could almost hear the voice of her former comrades as they rode peacocks and fought valiant battles. Now, though, she was separated by her friends by more than just a realm. The amount of time that had passed for them was 3 times more than had passed for her, and the landscape of the inn seemed both familiar and foreign to her, and just as many things remained the same, too many things had changed. "Come, lass. It's nice to live in a dream, but we also have to live in reality," said Noo, Layla's grandmother. "Although Vigus Minima is no longer plagued by the zombie crisis, our people are still too weak, our foundation still too frail. Leadership is both a privilege and a burden. As your father's heir, you are destined to live a different life from the rest. This is a great networking opportunity for your father. Reclaiming the 3 Vigus planets is not enough. We must expand beyond the 3 planets and grow our foundations as much as possible. For that, we need both resources and political favor. As newcomers into the Jotun Empire, we must exert even greater effort than others to get anything done." "I understand, grandmother," Layla said, recomposing herself. The grandmother and grandchild moved on, heading towards the pavilion where the girls' parents were mingling with others of a similar station. They didn't notice that, from afar, 2 young men stood on a hill, looking towards them. "Are they the ones you want me to help, little Jimmy?" one of them spoke fondly. "Yes, Uncle Will," Jimmy said. "And it's not just helping them out. It's attaining mutual benefits. Layla's family are not incompetent. If your Rose Society takes advantage of the fact that they are still developing and entrench yourself in their growing star system, you will also gain a powerful stronghold. Ah, little Jimmy. Why don't you go and help them out yourself? Besides acting as a leader of the Peacock Warriors, you have done well for yourself using the contacts you made. Helping out a mere star system is as easy as waving a hand for you. Although back in the day, there was a little misunderstanding between you and the girl's family, if you present yourself to them now, they will welcome you with open arms." Jimmy continued to look at Layla as she moved further away, and could read her like an open book. Though she tried to hide her emotions behind a mask of aloofness, it was of no use in front of someone like Jimmy who had gained a lot of experience in dealing with people. "Our childhood memories were nice, but that is all they were. Her parents were right, we are people from different worlds. They will be stuck to their star system, while I have the whole universe to explore. Besides, she's just a little girl and I'm an adult now. We have nothing left in common. No, Uncle Will, the reason I told you to help them is because I know you can gain a lot of benefit from it, nothing else. Will Bentham said nothing as he listened to Jimmy over-explain himself, but in his eyes there was a mischief that could not be hidden. He turned and looked back at the girl's family. He wondered what they would think now if they knew the little boy they turned away just a few years ago already had more power than their entire star system. The Peacock Warriors were not little kids anymore. Fortunately, he did not need to wonder. He could just go ahead and find out. Chapter 1544 Zombification. The governor of Vegas Minima and his family weren't the only ones from the Jotun Empire who had a history with the inn and had returned. The inn had many new cities that had been established to cover for the increasing number of guests, and in a particular city called Los Nachos, there was a pyramid-shaped building, although certain guests argued that it was the shape of a tortilla chip. Regardless of the inspiration for its architecture, the building was actually the latest and largest branch of the gamer's den. The building was divided into levels starting from the base all the way to the tip, and to move from one level to the next, all a guest needed to do was have some level of success in any game. It was more of a gimmick than anything else, yet it was surprisingly successful. Of course, the higher up one wanted to go, the greater the achievement they needed. Starting from playing a game halfway through, the difficulty requirement for each level rose. Some of the higher levels required achievements like attaining a high kill streak in the popular game COD, Call of Donuts, a game in which the gamer was a baker who baked lethally delicious donuts and got points for how many heart attacks their donuts could cause. Another example of a ridiculously difficult achievement required for a higher level of the building was getting a number of successful rolls in Eldom Rings, a game about a jeweler who made sentient wedding rings that would roll off the fingers of unfaithful spouses. Creating rings that could detect genuinely unfaithful spouses required an insanely high level of skill to the extent that it caused many players to rage quit the game. Of course, to get to the highest level of the building, one had to attain 100% completion in the ultimate game called Crusader Kings 3. The game was inspired by the Midnight Inn, and required players to host guests and deal with the immense difficulty of running an inn. Despite the difficulty of reaching the very top, it was ultimately meant to be achievable, and so guests who often visited the gamer's den would sooner or later achieve it. Leo, the owner of the gamer's den, was personally overseeing this branch as over 10,000 guests were currently in the building playing games. A large number of them were even participating in the ongoing LOL Laugh Out Legends tournament. Yet amidst the crowd, Leo suddenly spotted a familiar face, one he didn't expect to see at the gamer's den. Clarissa Jotun, sentient zombie, active member of the book club inside the inn, and daughter of Emperor Jotun, was sitting in one of the cubicles on the top floor, playing a cozy fishing game. Considering she was the daughter of the Emperor, Leo expected that she would be in a viewing booth, waiting to see her father's match. But, as unbelievable as her presence was in the gamer's den, even more surprising was that accompanying her were her fiancé, General Ragnar Asulf of the Jotun army, as well as Charles Best, the inn's doctor who was up until recently in seclusion. Leo could not help but go over to personally see if they needed anything. "Dear guests, I hope everything is up to standard," he said, walking up to them. "Please let me know if there's anything additional you might need." Clarissa didn't even turn, her focus entirely on decorating her fishing ship in the cutest way, but Ragnar and Charles looked over. Under their gaze, Leo couldn't help but reminisce a little. Back when the system was new, Ragnar was so unbelievably powerful to Lex, he was practically a living legend. Nay, he was a walking, talking myth. Yet now, even though he hadn't caught up to him in realm, he could at least sense that they were close, at least in terms of realm. Lex was not so arrogant as to think he was the general's equal just yet. He had a feeling that just as Cornelius had been unexpectedly powerful, the general boasted incredible power he did not normally reveal. If that were not the case, he would not have been selected as a son-in-law by the emperor personally. "Thank you for your consideration," said the general politely. "We have everything we need for now. I'll let you know if there's anything we require." The general's expression when looking at Lex was like an adult, looking fondly down at a child. It could not be helped after a lifetime of fighting demons. The general has a great fondness for humans, and strongly hated demons and devils. No wait, actually, we might just need your help, said Charles, his eyes suddenly sparkling as he saw Leo. Before elaborating, Charles pressed a button on the gaming table, causing a wall to rise out of the ground, isolating the gaming cubicle, creating a perfect environment for high-intensity gaming. General, Leo is more than just the owner of the gaming den, Charles said, turning to the man. He is also very resourceful, and may be able to help out with your situation. Of course, whether to include him in this is your own decision. I can only recommend it. The general turned to look at Leo more intensely, his gaze trying to penetrate past his appearance, studying him deeply. Leo, in turn, studied the general. During the general's last public fight with the devil, he had been infected by the curse destined to turn him into an immortal-level zombie. His pale, dry skin and red eyes hinted at the fact that the process had already begun. But the process was not supposed to take this long. The fact that he had not yet turned into a zombie entirely meant that, somehow, he was fighting the curse. If that was the case, Leo could somewhat guess as to what the general's predicament might be. After all, besides the three of them, there was also Clarissa in this room. She was someone who had been entirely zombified, yet had not actually died or lost her personality in the process. She retained her entire self, even though she was no longer human. Since Dr. Charles trusts you, I suppose it won't hurt to include you in this, finally said Ragnar. Chapter 1545 Secret even to me. Lex suddenly got the feeling like he was about to get pulled into something huge, but for once he no longer resisted it. It was kind of pointless. Previously, Lex wanted to avoid additional problems because he wanted to retreat into the inn for as long as possible to raise his strength. He needed to end the inn's seal previously because he had to break through to the Earth Immortal realm, and that was not something he could do within the Midnight realm. But once that was done, he wanted to go back to sealing the inn, or at least isolating it as much as possible. Yet now, not only was the inn possibly being targeted by numerous organizations, Lex decided it was better to assume it was being targeted and take precautions than otherwise. The addition of the joint quest put him in a situation where he might be unable to avoid getting involved in problems. He didn't know for sure what a joint quest would look like, but the very fact that it was emphasized that it was mandatory told Lex that it was likely troublesome. Since trouble was unavoidable, then Lex decided that he would no longer go out of his way to avoid issues. You don't need to worry about the nature of his issue, said Charles, explaining the situation to Lex. This is completely within the purview of the inn. You see, the good general and his fiancée have come to the inn to relax a little, but aren't able to do so because they're suffering from a terrible curse. Now, they are managing to resist the curse, but as a result, they can never really rest or go to sleep. Now that's interfering with their ability to enjoy any service at the inn which would cause them to rest or relax. Both the general and his fiancée here have not slept ever since they got cursed. Now, functionally, it is not impacting them since they don't really require sleep anymore. The good general was consulting with me for a way to temporarily disable the curse so that he may be able to rest. Now, I've come up with a way that such a thing can be done, but the requirements for it are a little unusual. The necessary ingredients and items are missing, and aren't available even at the inn. That's where I thought you might be able to help. Leo could tell that while Charles was telling the truth, he was not entirely forthcoming. But then again, it was not surprising, since this was a sensitive matter. He didn't care either way. The fact that the inn's services were being impacted, however, was a matter of grave concern for him, and not something he could overlook. If customer satisfaction fell, he would lose out on a lot of MP. So just to be clear, you need my help with procurement of specific resources, not a way to contain the curse, right? Leo asked, just to clarify. I mean, if you can come up with an effective way to disable the curse, I won't reject it. But realistically speaking, I think you have a better chance of getting your hands on the resources we need. It's not a problem. You can give me a list of whatever you need and I'll look into getting my hands on it. But first, just to be sure, do you mind if I try to see if I can come up with a way to contain this curse? Charles looked at Ragnar, who merely shrugged. Clarissa couldn't be bothered at all, so there was no real harm in trying. I suppose you can try, said Charles, though it was apparent that he didn't think it would work. He was right to doubt Leo. Neither Leo nor Lex were experts when it came to curses. However, it just so happened that Lex had an accessory which was quite knowledgeable on the subject. The real Lex, who was meditating within his room, sent his ring to Leo, who suddenly presented it to Ragnar. General, could you please put this on for a moment? Clarissa, who was in the middle of fishing up a big fish, suddenly looked away from the game and glared at Leo, who was presenting her fiancé with a ring. The general raised an eyebrow, and picked it up. Do I sense the aura of Pelvalin you are Bahatna Gorgon from this ring? The general asked, taking the full name of the dragon who had died to give birth to Pel Jr. It was no surprise that the general was familiar with the dragon. He had been an overlord of the Origin realm, and a true celebrity in every sense of the word. As a heavenly immortal dragon, even celestial immortals took note of it, let alone a fellow heavenly immortal like Ragnar. Partially, Leo confessed. The treasure spirit of this ring was born from a portion of that dragon's soul. But Pelvalin is well and truly dead. This is Pel Jr. Ragnar put the ring on, not bothering to take his glove off first. Fortunately, the ring adapted to the size of his finger, and expanded as he put it on. Oh really? I'm really curious to know how Pelvalin actually died. His power and fame were quite well known, and many expected him to reach the celestial level sooner rather than later. His demise is a genuine surprise. Unfortunately, that is a secret that eludes both me and Pel Jr. Although I may or may not have visited his treasure hoard shortly after his demise, the actual cause of his demise remains a mystery to this day. Actually, I'm surprised the other dragons haven't looked into it. Lex realized that a lot of people probably attributed the death of the dragon to him, which was the real reason he earned the title of Dragonsbane. But the truth was, Pelvalin had been dead even before Lex arrived onto his planet. But while Pel Jr. does not have access to the memories of Pelvalin's death, he should be able to access Pelvalin's knowledge on curses. Hey Pel, why don't you analyze the body of the person wearing your ring and tell me if you can think of a solution to his predicament? Chapter 1546 Demonification. Everyone turned to look at the ring after Leo spoke, waiting for it to do something. Although Lex had been slowly allowing the ring to grow stronger as of late, that did not mean that the ring had the ability to manifest a projection, or alter its form just yet. It may seem odd when compared to someone like Gawain, who not only was able to transform into a human shape, but was also on the verge of becoming a father. But if one took into consideration that Gawain had been alive for over 100,000 years, and had slowly mastered his own strength, then it made sense why the ring spirit, despite originating from the soul of a dragon, could not yet manifest a body or projection. But the lack of a form other than that of a ring did not mean that the ring was powerless. A spirit sense emerged from the ring and spread out across the room, so that it could communicate with them all, even as the ring delved into Ragnar's body. A demonification curse, the ring said, immediately identifying the problem. Demonification curses are not without cure, especially if the process has not been completed, like in your case. However, demonification is a generic term. In truth, what truly determines the rate of progress in demonification, as well as how to counter it, is the type of demon the target is being turned into. I can tell from your condition that you are being turned into a zombie, yet the process has been slowed down drastically. If I am not mistaken, then some kind of body cultivation method has been used to combat the zombification process. That's correct, stated Ragnar. Through the Henali, the Emperor acquired a method to prevent the zombification curse, but the problem is that the conditions to practice it are too strenuous and the resources are too rare. It is not something that can be implemented en masse. Our true purpose here is not to find a way to combat or prevent zombification, but to come up with a way to fight against it on a large scale, even by common people. The demon problem that the human race faces is a huge threat, and one we are not yet well equipped enough to entirely resist. Only by arming ourselves with the right tools and weapons to not only resist the devils, but the demonification curses themselves. Can we one day hope to cast off our destiny as victims of these devils? Let me see how this works first. Clearly, you have made some progress towards creating a body cultivation technique that can resist the demonification process, but it is not very effective. How can its efficiency be improved? While Pell Jr. began to ponder over his issue, Leo looked at the general oddly. He turned to look towards Charles as well, unsure if he should mention what he was thinking. Surely something so obvious had already been considered by the Empire. But, just to be sure. Have you guys looked into Botlamdu? Leo asked. Just so you know, I was also infected by zombies once. A vial of Botlamdu was all it took to clear that right up. Of course, I know it's only effective for cultivators below the foundation realm, but considering you want to use it for the masses, it could be a good solution. Yes, we have, said Ragnar, not at all bothered by the obvious question. But like you just said, we want a solution for the masses, and while we buy a lot of Botlamdu from the inn, we cannot afford to buy hundreds of billions of bottles to combat the demonification going on across thousands of planets. It's not practical, or even logistically possible. Yes, but have you tried looking into why Botlamdu works against demonification? I once saw an item called Botlam's Grace, and it too was a healing item, but was much stronger. Apparently, it contained the holy aura of an archangel. I'm not sure why it still had the name Botlam to it, but if holy aura can combat demonification, it can be a direction for us to look into. I'm afraid not, said Ragnar, shaking his head. Holy aura, and holy energy in general, is unique to the angel race alone. When the angel race makes use of divine energy, their bodies slowly gain the ability to transform all other energies into holy energy. That's actually what causes them to be so attractive for many deities to have as subordinates. Leo couldn't help but frown. It appeared like they were hitting a dead end with holy energy and Botlamdu, but he had a feeling it wasn't so simple. I have a few ideas, but why don't you give me the list of items you need me to procure anyway? In the meantime, Pell Jr. can also analyze your situation and recommend some solutions. We can gather back here before the Emperor's match to share our progress. Charles handed Leo a list, having no qualms with the idea. The general offered to return the ring, but Leo was in no rush. Instead, he left, stating that he needed to work on the list. Technically, that was true, for Lex summoned another clone to reach out to his usual sources to try to find the items on the list. But Leo himself, instead, turned his attention towards searching for another prominent figure in the Midnight Inn. A simple scan revealed that the man was within the designated headquarters for his organization within the Midnight Inn. Soon Leo appeared outside a small village that had been rented out entirely by the Paladins, a group of human warriors far away from the Jotun Empire. From what Leo recalled, the Paladins too used the power of faith to wield energies eerily similar to divine energy and holy energy. He had never specifically looked into how their power system worked, but now might be the right time to do just that. Chapter 1547 Grandmaster Lovis. Normally, even if a small village was rented out, that did not mean that the area of the small village would become off-limits to other guests. However, it remained within the renter's authority to make the area private, limiting the entrance of other guests. Considering the price of renting a small village was 15,000 MP per night, it was well within reason that the person who rented it out should be able to do such a thing. Leo stopped his thoughts from wandering as a man in heavy, silver-colored armor approached him, a massive shield latched onto his left arm and an unnecessarily thick sword in its scabbard at his hip. The Village of Light is closed and can only be entered with appointment, the man said, his voice booming as if he was afraid that Leo might not be able to hear him. State your name and who you wish to meet. If you have an appointment, I will escort you to your designated conference room. Hello, I'm Leo, owner of the Gamers Denver. I don't really have an appointment, but I'm interested in meeting Lovis, the leader here. I'd really appreciate it if you could see if he's available. Or, if not, if you could let me know how to get an appointment, that would be great. Wait, are you a worker of the inn? The guard asked, doubt and confusion evident in his voice. Yes, I do work for the inn, that is correct. Is everything all right? Why would a worker from No, it's not my station to ask. Come, I will take you to meet Grandmaster Lovis. He had recently attained promotion from the rank of paladin, as is expected from one such as him. Leo was not too familiar with the ranks among the paladins, but he knew that their ranks also coincided with their cultivation realm. If Lovis, the leader of the paladins within the inn, had increased in rank, then that meant that his cultivation had also increased. He had no doubt that the Midnight Games probably played a significant role in making that happen, because of course, the paladins had also taken part in it. The paladins had really made their rented village their home. The decor of the area was completely different from an ordinary village, sporting many statues of notable warriors probably, with heavy emphasis on symbols and engravings depicting a large shield and sword. The color white was also prominent in the surroundings, followed only by silver and azure. Leo couldn't help but notice that every paladin within the village was fully armored, not resting for even a moment within the safety of the inn. None of them seemed too bothered by it too. Many glanced towards Leo, a clear outsider, but did not pay him too much attention, going about their day. Instead of taking Leo to a conference room, it seemed like the guard brought Leo directly to the Grandmaster's office, which had its door wide open. Lovis, a large bulky man, wearing an even bulkier armor, was sitting at his desk brooding over some paperwork, his long, gold hair neatly tied behind his back. "Grandmaster, there is a worker from the inn here to see you," the guard exclaimed, his booming voice no doubt reverberating throughout the entire village. Yet Lovis seemed unbothered by it, and instead seemed more surprised to see Leo. "Twice in 1 week, this is a surprise." "Welcome, welcome. Please have a seat." Lovis was quite nimble for a man his size, though that was not surprising. A glance was all it took for Lex to realize that the man was an earth immortal, though if he was curious he could have always just scanned him. These days, Lex hardly ran into someone whose cultivation a system scan couldn't reveal. The only people he hadn't tested it on were those who were demi-Dao lords or Dao lords, and at that point it hardly mattered. So the days of wondering what everyone's cultivation was were long gone, though by now he could tell personally as well. "Twice in 1 week? Have you been visited by another worker?" Leo asked in surprise as he entered the office. "Yes, not too long ago I was visited by another worker who asked about our experience at the inn and if we felt if anything was lacking. They wanted to discuss the paladins officially declaring the Midnight Inn as a destination for some of our activities. As flattering as the offer was, it's something that we must discuss amongst our senior members before deciding. Keeping our actions relatively unknown serves us well." "Ah yes, I heard about that. The inn is making more of a push to better serve groups and organizations. Previously, all our focus was on guests as individuals. If you have any suggestions you wish to make to the inn, feel free to submit them, as now would be your best opportunity to see them fulfilled." "Yes, we will consider the matter carefully." "Are you also here to discuss the same matter?" "Oh no, not at all. I'm here for another, private matter." "I hope you forgive me for intruding." "Not at all. We, the paladins, take great pride in serving, and even greater pride in serving those who are truly deserving of it." For some reason, Leo couldn't shift the flow of the conversation to an informal one, for he constantly felt like Lovis was better in his element with a more formal tone. Although it did not suit his own personal preference, it wasn't as if he didn't know how to navigate such a conversation. "Well, to begin with, I hope to learn more about the paladins, and clear up some possible misconceptions I may have about them. It appears to me that paladins make use of divine and holy energy, both extremely rare and powerful energies that almost no one in the universe can easily make use of. I find it almost unbelievable that you are able to do so, but thought it was better to go directly to the source rather than continue to speculate." Chapter 1548 David Paladin. Lovis did not immediately answer the question, but instead scrutinized Leo. Leo was much too used to being the one who was requested for favors, so it felt a little unusual being on the other side. That did not mean that he flinched or shied away. Leo maintained eye contact while Lovis studied him, though he did so with a polite smile. "None of this is really much of a secret," Lovis finally said. Even so, I hope you don't mind me asking. For what reason do you pursue this knowledge? The paladins stand for justice, fighting against tyranny and helping those in need. Many try to oppose us, and are keen to discover our weaknesses. If you fight against tyranny and evil, then our intentions are aligned, Leo said with a smile. I cannot reveal the specific details, but I don't mind sharing my purpose with you. I don't know if you have encountered them, but there are demonic forces out there that specifically target humans, and convert us into demons as well. I, too, was once afflicted by such a curse, but I was cured using boundless, which is especially effective against demons. Now, I am trying to understand why boundless is effective against demons. The energy contained within, as far as I can gather, is similar to the holy aura used by angels. From what I recall, that is very similar to what the paladins use. If what you use is effective against the demonification process, then it may alter the very fight against demons and devils that the human race fights. Lova's expression hardened upon listening to Leo's words, and for a moment he seemed distracted. When he finally turned to look back at Leo, he seemed like he had made an important decision, though all Leo had done was ask a little about the paladin's history. The fight against demons. You may not know it, but the origins of the paladins, the very core of who we are, is entrenched in the fight against demons. Follow me. Lovas got up from his chair, revealing his body, which was much larger, not only in height but also width, than a regular human. Lex suspected that their cultivation method, whatever it was, slowly grew their bodies larger as they progressed. Hefting his sword and shield, which were bigger than the ones used by other soldiers to remain large in proportion to Lovas, the man led the way out of the office and to the center of the village where a particularly prominent statue was placed. This is David Paladin, the founder of our order, and the man who started it all with nothing more than the strength of his arm and the will to change the world. He was born immortal in a world where cultivation was out of reach of most. If things had not gone askew, he would have lived out his life as a simple scholar, working in the local mayor's office. But just like you said, humanity is plagued by demons. One day, a portal opened up on his world leading to the underworld, and a horde of demons came spewing out, wreaking havoc across the lands. Empires collapsed, countries fell to ruin, and humanity was brought to the brink of extinction. As circumstances would have it, David became part of a small settlement with no hope for survival if the demons attacked. With his wife and child behind him, David took an oath, the first oath, and put his faith in his own hard work and ability. Every day, even when no demons attacked, he trained until he was on the very verge of death. Every day, he endured hardship, never shying away, never breaking from his oath. Such stalwart was his faith in himself that when the demons finally came, he faced them, a mortal man, with no equipment or gear. In the face of death and destruction, with his back to his family, he demonstrated the core principles that form a paladin, and ushered forth the holy light of our order. A wooden door, ripped from its hinges, became his shield. A stone pillar, left without a roof to support, became his sword. A lone man, he himself became the boundary wall that prevented mankind's extinctions. Your purpose is just, and so the halls of the paladins will be open to you. You may learn freely of our creed, of our history. You will find that the path of the paladins is the simplest in existence, and yet the hardest to walk. Should you ever visit the homeworld of the paladins, you will receive an open welcome to the halls of accompanies, where the swords and spirit of our heroes rest, until such a day that they are needed. Lovas led Leo to a library within the village where he was allowed to freely study the paladin's path. To his immense surprise, just as Lovas said, cultivating as a paladin was extremely easy. It required only an oath, and one's own faith in that oath, tested through real trial and tribulation. Yet despite its simplicity, to attain such faith in one's own self to give birth to the holy light, it seemed impossible. Lex was mesmerized as he read about a unique cultivation path, one that used faith to empower oneself rather than a foreign deity. This was some kind of offshoot from the path of becoming a deity, where only the faith of the person himself mattered. It gave birth to a power that was similar, but not exactly like divine energy. It had traits of the angel's holy power, and yet it was entirely unique. Leo's eyes widened as he read on, getting a feeling deep in his that there was a lot more to this cultivation path than even the paladins themselves realized. After all, it seemed to have many of the benefits of the path of a deity, without having any of the drawbacks. "I have a question," Leo asked a nearby librarian, though his eyes never left the book he was reading. "Whatever happened to David Paladin? It is not mentioned in the books I've seen." "It is a mystery even we do not know," the librarian confessed. "Much of the history of the early days is distorted. But while what happened to David is a mystery, his family line endures still, bringing honor to his name." Leo stopped listening at that point. He had another gut feeling, this one particularly strong, the kind he learned to not ignore, that finding out what happened to David would be critically important to him personally. Within his own apartment, Lex summoned yet another clone. This one focused all its attention solely on studying the paladin's cultivation path, and figuring out a way it could be used to combat demonification. Chapter 1549 Melancholic. As Lex sat in the veranda of a wooden cabin halfway up Mount Midnight, sipping hot chocolate made from some magical cocoa tree that the turtle had somehow mutated, he could not help but reflect on life. Once, just living two separate lives simultaneously had been an achievement for him. Now, he was living a dozen lives simultaneously, and chilling at the same time. Lex suddenly felt like he should create a service where the guest has a clone chilling all the time while they themselves work. It was oddly enjoyable. Of course, this was the kind of thing he could only do inside the inn. Lex still hadn't found a cloning technique that perfectly satisfied him, and all his clones were either really weak or had to stay within a certain distance of his main body. What happened with Jack was an accident he couldn't really replicate even if he wanted to. With the inn completely under his control, its entire region basically under his eye, it provided a safe environment for him to play around like this. Of course, if a serious situation were to occur that required him to focus all his attention, the clones would all either vanish, or enter a dormant state depending on how they were made. "Hey Mary, you ever had hot chocolate?" Lex asked as he continued to stare out into the distance. He had a couple of days to burn before work got serious, and he intended on spending it, just doing nothing. His previous vacation wasn't as restful as he thought it might be, so he wanted to just chill a little on his own. Although, technically, every other version of him was working. But there was no need to get technical on a vacation. Not really, no. Believe it or not, chocolate isn't really a universally existing thing. I didn't even know about its existence until the system merged with you. That's sad. How long till you get your body? Just thinking about the fact that you have to live so long without having chocolate is a little depressing. Well, based on our current rate of accumulating the necessary ingredients, if I maintain my current standard, then a few centuries. If I drop my standards a little, then as soon as you give me the phoenix feather, I'll be good to have my body be born. A few centuries, huh? Lex's thoughts drifted off once more, no longer speaking. Yet Mary, who had appeared, for once in a simple shirt and jeans, stared at him for a while. "Are you feeling melancholic?" she asked in a somber tone. For immortals, it took a great to cause a shift in mood or emotion, especially towards anything negative, yet that did not mean it was impossible. It just so happened that out of the dozen or so parts Lex had split his mind into, the one controlling this body was feeling morose. It may have happened randomly, or it may have been something he carried around with him all the time, without ever showing it. "I guess," he responded, his gaze still out into the distance. "Talk to me. What's going through your mind?" she asked as she pulled up a chair, and sat in the air right in his line of sight. Lex looked at her for a moment, then sighed. "I'm not sad or anything, if that's what you're thinking." "Then what is it?" "It's just, my life is kind of awesome, you know?" Lex smiled as he said that, a genuine smile, not a facade. "Back before the system, whenever I used to do anything fun or crazy, I used to call up a few friends, or even my family and rub it in. I used to make my sisters jealous, and somehow, it was just more fun like that. Well, my family is a mess, so let's not even get into that. But I just traveled to 2 different major realms, met a bunch of important people, possibly changed the course of the political climate for the entire angelic race, learned a bunch about karma, went out on a date with a terrorist and, well, I don't really have anyone I can brag to at the moment. I'm not unappreciative about my life, and this doesn't mean I don't love every moment of it. But it's just. Lex paused, as if searching for the right words, but then eventually just sighed. I don't know. Mary looked at Lex and, for the first time, despite spending so many years together, that maybe a part of him was lonely. You have me. You can always talk to me about that stuff. Lex snorted and rolled his eyes. Mary, you forget I can sense souls, and the two souls I can always sense, even in my sleep, are you and the system. I don't pry when you go off and do sneaky stuff because everyone deserves to have their privacy. But you gotta admit, it's hard to treat someone like one of the boys if that someone is actually a remnant soul of a celestial Tao Lord who knows everything about you, has more knowledge about systems than possibly anyone else in the universe, is creating a body that surpasses her peak body in terms of potential, and could possibly steal your system from you the moment she returns. The up until now casual conversation suddenly turned incredibly serious, and Mary, for once, felt like she was standing on thin ice. Is that what you think of me? She asked. Lex snorted, and shook his head. Relax, I'm joking. Even if you do come back with a new body, I doubt it'll match up to me. I'll have you know, besides being notoriously handsome, I'm also incredibly talented. Mary rolled her eyes. Clearly whatever mood had infected Lex had passed already, and he was back to being normal. Listen, no matter what you think, you should know, I'm eternally grateful for whatever help you're giving me. Ignoring the fact that I have no intentions of getting mixed up with systems anymore in the future, even if that were not true, I would never do anything to hurt you. Without your help, I have no hope of truly being free ever again. That's not the kind of thing I would overlook. Ever. Lex looked at her for a moment, taking in her sincere expression. Relax. I already said I was joking. What I meant was, I can't really treat you as one of the boys until you're truly free, and not obligated by the system to be nice to me. When you regain your body, and regain your freedom, then we can see about everything else. For now, I think I'm going to go chill in the lazy river. Lex jumped right off the mountain, but Mary stayed where she was, looking at Lex, leaving in the distance, with complicated emotions in her eyes. Chapter 1550 Final Hours. Splitting his workload over a dozen or so clones was all well and good, but in the hours leading up to Jotun's death match, the number of guests arriving at the inn exploded, leaving him not a moment to spare his attention for anything else. Lex had to dismiss all his other clones, leaving merely a projection of the innkeeper in his office to supervise the inn. His main body had to don the mask of the invincible tyrant and appear in the inn, personally taking action. Over 100 billion guests had arrived at the inn, and these were not mortals or golden core cultivators that had shown up. No, these were all immortals, mainly either from the Jotun Empire or from the fiery Mammoth's galaxy. The problem with their arrival was that both the humans and the beasts had already suffered a lot during their short war, and tensions were incredibly high. They were ready to fight at the drop of a hat, and the venue for that fight would have been the Midnight Inn. What's more, the devils took the opportunity to flood into the inn as well, connecting and networking with as many new guests as possible. Many powerful and senior representatives from various powers across the Origin realm also showed up to watch the match. It seemed like almost suddenly there were over 1 million celestial immortals inside the inn, and over 1 billion heavenly immortals. No matter how strong Lex was personally, or the strength that the inn had accumulated, it was a drop in the ocean against such a massive crowd. The good thing was that with such a massive flood of guests came a massive amount of MP and MT. Without any hesitation, Lex spent over 10,000 metric tons, almost all the money he had, on security for the event. Yet he was faced with an unprecedented situation. Even the raving dread mercenary fell short of qualified personnel to handle such a large event. But it was exactly in a moment like this that the power of the system shone through. Lex did not know who these people were that suddenly arrived at the inn, acting as security, or where the system found them. But for the cost of 10,000 metric tons, the largest sum he had ever made and spent, it summoned a proverbial army out of thin air. Alongside with the appearance of representatives from the Hanali, 99% of the crowd calmed down. But even the remaining 1% consisted of over a billion immortals Lex needed to see to. He remembered to send a quick message to General Ragnar that due to the sudden influx of guests he wouldn't be able to attend their meeting, but sent him an estimated time of arrival for the list of goods Charles had requested. This was an all-hands-on-deck moment, and he even had to expedite the return of Luther, and call back every single worker inside the Temple of Fasting. It was only a few hours until the actual fight, yet to Lex, at that moment, at the rate that he was handling the countless issues popping up, it may as well have been years. Within the Origin realm, a Celestial was having a boxing match with a Jorlum. The match was, of course, within a contained field prepared by the Hanali, where they used Jorlum they had captured during their fights. Normally, a dozen or so celestial immortals fought the Jorlum together, using the rare opportunity to hone their fighting skills. But as this celestial fought the Jorlum alone, he seemed almost bored. He was in a unique situation where celestial immortals were too weak for him to fight, yet anything pertaining to the Tao was too high above his power level. There was literally nothing left in this realm to entertain him. A sound he had become all too familiar with suddenly rang in his ear, informing him of a new notification from his system. New quest, act as security for a prominent event. Quest limitation, all memories pertaining to the quest will be wiped upon completion of the event. Quest reward, unlock chain quests. Remarks, how fortunate for the guests at that event, that they get to see you there. The Celestial raised an eyebrow, completely ignoring the Jorlum right in the middle of their fight. What's this? Won't you upgrade the quest like you normally do for me, system? He asked in a teasing voice. New notification, unable to upgrade quest. This is a special, time-sensitive quest. Please accept it soon. Feeling bored, the Celestial turned to look at the Jorlum for a moment, before turning away again. He accepted the quest, unaware that he was returning to the inn where he once acted as a bodyguard. How could he remember to begin with? Just like last time, accepting the quest meant all his memories of it would be wiped afterwards. In the depths of the Origin realm was a prison, built exactly between two black holes, forming a precarious balance, falling into the pull of neither. Within that prison was a creature that had seen neither the light of day, nor felt the touch of anything save his chains for countless years. It was a creature best left forgotten, unknown even to the current rulers of the Origin realm. The creature was like a statue, entirely unmoving, lost in a meditation that had lasted longer than even it knew. Yet the creature suddenly woke from its slumber upon hearing a sound that it had not heard in a lifetime. New quest, kill those who step out of line while serving as security at an event. Quest limitation, all memories pertaining to the quest will be wiped upon completion of the event. Quest reward, continue to live. Quest failure punishment, soul degradation. Remarks, just die already. A moment later, the creature vanished from his prison, and his absence caused the carefully calculated balance of his prison to crumble, destroying it entirely. A Marzu prince was flying through the air, using neither his fabulous feathers nor his magical powers. Instead, he relied solely on the wooden broom upon which he sat. The prince suddenly heard a very familiar sound, causing his attention to divert. Although he did not need to use his eyes to read system notifications, as if by habit, he fixed his round spectacles, slightly revealing a lightning-shaped scar on his forehead. New quest, an event has been infiltrated by evil spawn. Act as security and clear them out. Quest limitation, all memories pertaining to the quest will be wiped upon completion of the event. Quest reward, an upgrade to an existing spell. Quest remarks, for once try not to eat everyone.